Our next speaker, of course, is Graham Hancock. And Graham is a person that I have tremendous respect and admiration for. He is a man of courage. He is a man of brilliant intelligence. He is articulate, and I could listen to him speak on any topic. And we are fortunate today that he is going to speak on the lost Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, and the search for Solomon's Temple, to be followed by the War on Consciousness. A round of applause, please, for the wonderful prayer.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen. I feel myself to be amongst friends and amongst like-minded people. And it's wonderful to see Richard Hoagland here, my old companion in arms. We've been struggling against the establishment for forever.
And I am a conspiracy theorist.
And you are a conspiracy theorist. And James, thank you, for bringing together these magnificent events. And the power of collective goodwill cannot be underestimated. And I don't want to forget to thank James's wonderful wife, Anne, as well, who plays a magnificent role in all of this, and the whole team. And all of us here. So, thank you for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. There was a time in my life when I was not interested in ancient mysteries. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I was a current affairs journalist. And I was, my last role as a journalist was as the East Africa correspondent for The Economist. It's a very mainstream newspaper. And I was based in Nairobi in Kenya, and I was traveling widely around the region. Ethiopia was regularly on my beat, a troubled country with many, many problems and difficulties, a civil war going on, famines. And it was during my travels to Ethiopia, in fact in 1982 or early 1983, that I had an encounter in a strange, eerie city in the north of Ethiopia called Aksum, which was then in the middle of a war zone, with a monk who told me that in the chapel behind him was the Ark of the Covenant. I'd actually just seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I thought, okay, interesting, what can we make of this? So naturally I asked him if I could see it, and he said I could not. And furthermore that it would be extremely dangerous for me if I were to see it. And he pointed to the cataracts in his eyes. And this became a recurrent theme because I met several of these guardians of the Ark over the years. And I felt myself drawn into a mystery. And that mystery drew me out of current affairs, and I began to feel that there's just much more fascinating stuff locked away in our forgotten past than there is in the present. And so it was the beginning of a complete change of direction for me. And I'll be outlining some of that exploration and some of that inquiry in this talk. So we're looking at an image of the Ark of the Covenant here. We actually have a pretty good idea what it should have looked like. And this is rather a good representation. There is effectively a detailed blueprint of the Ark of the Covenant in the book of Exodus. And we know from that it was 3 feet 9 inches long, 2 feet 3 inches high and wide, that it was carried on carrying poles which were borne on the shoulders of specially selected and trained bearers, that it was a golden box, that within it was a wooden box, and that within the wooden box was another golden box. And in the heart of that second golden box were the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Now, of course, the Ark is most directly associated with the figure of Moses. And we read in the book of Exodus that he leads the children of Israel out of captivity in Egypt, and off they go to Sinai, to the Sinai Peninsula. And it's on Mount Sinai that he has his encounter with the deity and is given the blueprint for the Ark of the Covenant. And here are some images of Mount Sinai here, and the monastery in the lower right hand of the screen is St. Catherine's Monastery. But I have to say that there is some dispute about the exact location of Mount Sinai. There is another contender, and that I've also been there, and that's in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, and that is also on a mountain, and it's called Sirabit al-Qadam. And interestingly, on the top of Sirabit al-Qadam are the remains of an ancient Egyptian temple, and that's the temple of Hathor that's found in Sirabit al-Qadam. So these are the two possible contenders for Mount Sinai. But wherever it was, extraordinary events unfolded there. And the Ark of the Covenant came into being, we are told, as a result of very specific instructions from God. But it's interesting to note that in ancient Egypt, there are objects rather like the Ark of the Covenant. You can see here, this is the Temple of Karnak, and you can see in these reliefs that a group of priests are carrying on their shoulders a boat-like object, the little shrine on top of it. The basic concept in that shrine was an image of the god, of the deity. It was considered to be very, very powerful. So the basic concept of something that has been touched by God, carried on the shoulders of bearers in some sort of object, in this case a boat with a shrine on top of it, is very ancient Egyptian. And you can see, in fact, one of these surviving boat shrines at the Temple of Horus at Edfu in Upper Egypt. That is not a modern reconstruction, that is one of those ancient shrines dating from the Ptolemaic period, relatively recent, about 2,300 years old. And we found in the Cairo Museum, I say we because all of my travels and adventures have been done with my wife Santha, who's a photographer, and I don't think I would have done any of them without her, actually. This is from the Tutankhamun exhibit in the Cairo Museum. And this is one of the objects that was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And again, you can see that it's carried on carrying poles. There's carrying poles thrust through it. And it's a box-like object. And if we consider another aspect of the Ark of the Covenant, which is the cherubim, those winged figures that are mounted on top of it, between which some kind of spark or energy or power is generated. We're told this in great depth in the Bible and how dangerous that energy is. Well, this concept of winged figures is also very much part of the ancient Egyptian heritage. And I don't think that it's possible to understand the Ark of the Covenant without understanding its ancient Egyptian background. So it's interesting. We're dealing with, of course, a sacred object here, no doubt about that. But we're also dealing with an object that sometimes sounds suspiciously like technology. And in fact, it was the technological aspects of the Ark that first led me down the path that eventually resulted in the writing of Fingerprints of the Gods, and the thought that there might have been a lost civilization, that ancient Egypt might have inherited an amazing knowledge from a remote past. And if we just consider a few of the things that the Ark is said to do, we see that it stops the waters of the River Jordan when it's carried across the river. We see that it's a fearsome weapon in battle. There are accounts, extra-biblical accounts. If you get into the legends of the Jews, for example, there's an amazing collection of Jewish legends put together by Ginsberg, ancient legends. We hear stories of the Ark rising up into the air, sometimes lifting its bearers off the ground, sometimes breaking free of them and flying through the air towards the enemies of Israel and emitting a kind of howling or moaning sound, terrifying prospect, and striking people dead. It could kill its own bearers when they didn't carry it properly. very, very strange idea. It kills Uzzah when the ark is being carried up to Jerusalem, and Uzzah tries to stabilize it on the cart on which it's being carried, and a bolt of fire shoots out of it and strikes him dead. It's used in the destruction of Jericho. Of course, we focus on the blowing of the horns, and I think that's important too, but it's very clear when you look at that account that the ark is being carried around the walls of Jericho. And some kind of sound energy, I think, is being emitted by those horns, and the combination of the two is to bring down the walls of Jericho. And most eerie of all, when the Philistines capture the ark, as they do briefly, and take it to the city of Ashdod and use it as a kind of tourist object, and march in front of it, and they make the mistake of opening the ark. And this is something that was a really, really bad idea to do. And the Bible tells us that 50,000 of them died. And here's the strange thing, that they died of cancerous tumors. So what is this object which is a weapon and which kills in this way, which it sounds like some kind of radiation device, almost, completely out of place in time? What is it doing there? And it's true also of the ancient Egyptian arks. There are many accounts in ancient Egyptian tradition that these objects were dangerous, or that something contained in them was dangerous and could strike people dead. And not only that, but the crowns of the pharaohs were reputed to have an energetic basis, that one had to wear special clothing to wear the crown and be in some way specially trained or specially prepared. And that if somebody who was not trained or prepared put the crown on their head, it would burn into their skull. Some sort of burning heat is involved in it. And of course, this is a famous image from the crypt at the Temple of Dendera in Upper Egypt. And the truth is, nobody knows what it is, including Egyptologists. But it is in a very dark place. You have to actually usually bribe the guard, and you go down through a hole in the floor into a labyrinth of corridors beneath the temple, where they have some low-level electric lighting now, but in ancient times, of course, it would have been completely dark. And there, in a remote corner, we find this very strange relief. And it's difficult as a modern person used to technology to look at this without thinking that some kind of technology is going on here. It's a very famous out-of-place artifact. Many, many people have reported on this. And the suggestion is that it might be some kind of electric lighting device or something. But again, there's this technological feeling about it. And then, of course, there's the famous ancient Egyptian bird that isn't a bird. Because it's placed in a display case of birds. But this is the one that isn't a bird, because no bird has got its wings mounted on the top of its shoulders like that. And no bird has got an upright tail like that. And no bird has got an aerofoil section in its wings. This ancient Egyptian aeroplane has been wind tunnel tested, and it's very aerodynamic and quite capable of flight. And it's the incorporation of aerofoil principles into the wing and the overall design of it that really don't fit into place in time in ancient Egypt. It should be a bird, but actually it's a plane, and it's more than well over 2,000 years old, and it was found near the pyramid of Saqqara in Upper Egypt, and Saqqara is in Lower Egypt, and Saqqara is about 15 miles south of the great pyramid complex at Giza. And what an amazing place to go. How many here have been to Giza? Yeah. So you see how we're all drawn to this magical place, and I bet many of you have not been, have an intention to go at some point. It's a place of pilgrimage. It draws us from all over the world. There is something truly, truly remarkable about it. And actually, if you're considering the possibility of a lost technology in ancient Egypt, you don't have to go much further than the Great Pyramids. Because the Great Pyramid is just an astonishing, as well as being an astonishingly huge thing, it's also an astonishingly accurate thing. almost a sort of atomic level accuracy in the creation of this gigantic monument. I mean, Egyptologists like to say, you know, it was these bunches of kind of, I don't know, not slaves, the idea, absurd idea that this was built by slaves. I've climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times. It's a work of artistry from top to bottom. Nobody in a state of slavery was ever involved in the creation of this monument. It's a work of absolute perfection, involving gigantic stone blocks. I am going to tell a little personal story here, which I know some of you have heard before. If you have, please forgive me, because I do love to tell this story. But that is the corner that you want to climb up if you're going to climb the Great Pyramid illegally, which is actually the only way to climb it these days, unfortunately. It's a dangerous monument to climb. I think the Egyptian government are probably right to restrict climbing because people do get killed every year climbing the Great Pyramid. 52-degree slope, you know, up there. But the southwest corner is the corner to go up because the other corners are quite badly eroded. I've been up the southeast corner as well, and that was a complete nightmare. Getting to the top was very difficult, and the very notion of teams of thousands of men moving up and down the pyramid, carrying these blocks of stone at those heights and at those angles, just crazy. So it stares us in the face, but it is a work of high technology, and it towers over and dominates the city of Cairo today. You can't miss it wherever you go, and really nothing in the modern realm compares with this incredible sight. So Santa took this photograph. This is where I come to the story that I've told before, but you know, I'm getting on in years and I do like to repeat myself. Santa took this photograph from an Egyptian military helicopter, and we are poised over the north east side of the Giza Plateau, over the village of Nazret al-Saman. And in that picture is the Sphinx. But the Sphinx is 270 feet long and 70 feet high, but the scale of the place is just so huge that you can hardly know that it's there. There it is again, down there. We're now on the northwest side, and it's rightly said that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, because you can see the beautiful, fertile Nile Valley off to the east, and off to the west, this sere and inhospitable desert. There would be no life in Egypt if it were not for the Nile. So we come closer now. We're seeing the north face of the Great Pyramid, north face of the second pyramid, north face of the Pyramid of Menkaura. That's where all the true entrances to these pyramids are. Closer still, and there's half a course of masonry up there on top of the Great Pyramid, an uncompleted Great Pyramid. We don't know if it was ever completed. Did they put a Ben stone on top of it, a pyramidion, or was it never completed, for some reason deliberately left unfinished? It's not certain. They finished the second pyramid, and you can see the amazing technological feat of the so-called casing blocks on the second pyramid. We know that the Great Pyramid was also covered in such blocks. They did come off in an earthquake in 1301, and they were now reincorporated into mosques and palaces all over Cairo. So we don't know if the Great Pyramid was finished, but up there, 481 feet above the ground, there is a younger Graham Hancock. Before I had my hip replaced, you know. I like to think I could still do it. But what an amazing place to be. What an incredible place to be, floating on a magic carpet above the city of Cairo. A privilege to stand there and to think of all those who've been there before and to look at the graffiti that's carved on those stones. Because lots of people who go up there carve their names, including the famous mapmaker Mercator, who went there in the 1500s, and many, many others in modern and more recent times. And this is my personal story. One step down behind me, I found the name P. Hancock, 5th of April, 1916. And my granddad was called Philip Hancock, and I did know he'd been in Egypt with British forces during the First World War. So I called my dad at home in England. He was alive then. And I asked him to get out Grandpa's diaries, which I knew he had. And I asked him to check the date, 5th of April, 1916. So I hear the rustling of the paper on the desk, and my dad says, okay, I've got it, but there's just one line here. And I said, what does that line say? And he said, climbed Great Pyramid today. So, I don't know. There's my personal connection with the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Stands on latitude 30, 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole. This is part of the technological story of the Great Pyramid. It speaks to our planet. Whoever created it knew exactly what they were doing. They positioned it at a highly significant latitude, and they also aligned it almost perfectly to true north. That's another way that it speaks to our planet, because true north, true south, those are key dimensions of our planet. Just 3/60ths of a single degree off true north. And for all I know, that may have been caused by a little bit of continental drift since it was created. Interestingly, the Great Pyramid is a scale model of our planet. That if you take its base perimeter and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. All we ever needed to do in all those centuries of darkness when we didn't even know we lived on a planet, if we wanted to know the size of the planet we didn't know we lived on, all we ever needed to do was to go measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply by 43,200, and we would have the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And likewise, if you take the height of the Great Pyramid, multiply by the same number, you get the polar radius of the Earth. Egyptologists know this, but they say it's a coincidence. I don't know. I mean, what a strange mindset, you know, to say it's a coincidence. But the fact is that that number 43,200 is a key number. It relates to another feature of our planet, which is the precession of the equinoxes, that our planet has a wobble on its axis, which causes the North Pole to point at different stars over very long periods. To cut a long story short, it operates at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 72 times 30 is 2,160, which is one complete house of the zodiac. That's how long a zodiacal sign holds the sun. And 2,160 times 20 is 43,200, which is the scale in the pyramid-Earth ratio. So I can't believe for a moment that this is a coincidence. It's deliberate, and whoever made it had a high level of science and technology and a high knowledge of our Earth and of astronomy, and incorporated that into that monument. And that high knowledge, undoubtedly, would have been inherited by Moses, because Moses was reared in the household of the Pharaoh. He was groomed as a potential future Pharaoh. That was what he was going to become. But we know the story of his rebellion and how he leads the children of Israel out of Egypt in the end. And we hear stories of magic and sorcery and Moses and Aaron and Aaron's rod turning into a serpent and so on and so forth. The ancient Egyptians had a concept of high magic. They called it hekau. And from hekau we still get the modern word hex. But I believe that ancient Egyptian magic was science, that it was a science in the hand of an initiated priesthood, and Moses undoubtedly would have been initiated into that system. So I believe when he received the blueprint of the Ark of the Covenant from God, it was something he already knew how to do. And he commanded the construction of the Ark by the craftsman Bezalel, and we then hear of the Ark, of the journey of the Ark, as the children of Israel continue their wanderings through the Sinai desert. I've already talked about the crossing of the River Jordan. The Ark's involved in that. And also this cloud that rises up, a cloud and a pillar of fire, intimately connected again with the Ark of the Covenant. So it's the talisman of the Israelites as they march through the wilderness and as they enter the promised land. And it becomes, as I mentioned, a fearsome weapon in battle. But there is this moment when things go wrong and the Philistines capture it. And then we have this incredible story of Ashdod and the infliction of cancerous tumors upon the Philistines. So much so that they say, we don't want this thing anymore. And they put it on a cart led by bullocks. They close it, of course. They put it on a cart and they send it off. And the Israelites reacquire it in that way. And the story then continues as we come into the reign of David. And the ark is, David aspires to bring the ark up to Jerusalem. And he wants to build a temple for the ark. And the story of the ark as it goes up to Jerusalem incorporates a number of key features. One of those is that moment when Uzzah tries to steady it on the cart and he's struck dead by a bolt of fire. So Steven Spielberg was absolutely, right in the way that he described the ark. These fiery bolts shooting out of it, there's detailed biblical testimony for that. And there's this dancing that takes place before the ark, a very specific kind of ecstatic dancing involving certain musical instruments that we'll come to as we go further into the story. And David brings the ark to Jerusalem. However, David has been a really bad guy. And God makes it clear that David is too polluted an individual to build the temple for the ark. And interestingly, another thing as well, there is only one function given to the temple in Jerusalem. If you study the Bible, its function, the thing it is actually built to do is to serve as an house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord. David is not to build that house of rest. He has polluted his soul. That job is to be done by his son Solomon. And of course, King Solomon has a famous name throughout global culture for his magical powers and his great wisdom, of course, and his incredible abilities and renown as a king. And one of the fantastic episodes in the story of King Solomon is the visit of the Queen of Sheba to Jerusalem. And the hint of romance hangs around this story. What were Solomon and Sheba up to? Something rather remarkable goes on there. At any rate, Solomon, I'll come back to the story of the Queen of Sheba, but Solomon gets to build the temple. And the temple is very interesting for a number of features, including this huge lake, really, contained in a vast bronze container called the sea that stands in the courtyard of the temple, and the golden interior of the temple, and the Holy of Holies, a golden cube completely lined with gold in all its walls, into the heart of which is placed the Ark of the Covenant. And when you read the accounts, you get the sense that that what is being built there is a place that will shield and enclose the deadly powers of the Ark of the Covenant. Because, of course, gold is a fantastic radiation shield, far better than lead. So I'm reminded again of the ancient Egyptian context, that we have also sacred lakes in ancient Egyptian temples. We have the columns, rather like Jachin and Boaz, which are the two columns of the Temple of Solomon. Interestingly, also, we have the mystery of Hiram Abiff, which brings this whole story into connection with Freemasonry, that Hiram, the king of Tyre, writes a letter to King Solomon advising him that he's sending Huram-Abi to work on the temple. And that's in 2 Chronicles 2:11-14. And it's interesting that Huram-Abi is the son of a widow. This is a theme that comes up again and again. And it comes up much later in the Grail legends as well, which I'll be touching on. So out comes Hiram from Tyre, a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. And his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work. So he's the key builder of the temple. And he's a key figure in Freemasonry. All around the world today, you'll find that Freemasons venerate this figure of Hiram Abiff. And according to Masonic tradition, this Hiram was murdered by 3 of his assistants soon after he completed the bronze work of the temple. And this event is commemorated in the initiation ceremonies for Master Masons. I'm not a Freemason myself, by the way. But I've been asked to speak in Masonic lodges several times, and these details have been confirmed to me. And there's a kind of symbolic death and rebirth takes place in this ritual, that the individual is symbolically killed and then brought back to life. But just to read from John J. Robinson's Born in Blood, and he was a Freemason. Blindfolded on the ground, the initiate hears the 3 murderers decide to bury him in a pile of rubble until low 12 midnight, when they will carry the body away from the temple. To symbolize the burial of Hiram Abif, the candidate is wrapped in a blanket and carried to the side of the room. Soon he hears a bell strike 12 times and is carried from the rubble grave to a grave dug on the brow of a hill west of Mount Moriah, that's the Temple Mount. And he hears the murderers agree to mark his grave with a sprig of acacia and then set out to escape to Ethiopia. Note that. An Ethiopian connection right there. And interestingly, according to the ancient Egyptian tree of life, which is demonstrated here on the walls of the temple of Karnak, where Thoth writes the name, the immortal name of the pharaoh when he has attained immortal life. The tree of life is Acacia nilotica, and the wood in the ark itself was also acacia wood. So we come to this great ceremony. The ark is carried into the Holy of Holies of the temple. A huge cloud fills the Holy of Holies, and thereafter only the high priest is allowed to go in before the ark. And hundreds of years then pass with the ark unremarked. It's really quite striking. Before its installation of the Temple of Solomon, it is the most mentioned object in the Bible. There's 200 separate mentions of it. After it's installed in the Temple of Solomon, it vanishes from history completely. And I would say that in that period, between roughly 950 before Christ and 587 before Christ, when the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem takes place, in that period the mystery of the ark unfolds. And we should not leap to the conclusion that it was stolen by the Babylonians. In fact, there's no evidence for that at all. Because when the Babylonians did overthrow Jerusalem, and the Babylonians were the most tedious bureaucrats, and they kept incredibly detailed records of everything they took from the ark, from the temple. But the one thing they did not take from the temple was the Ark of the Covenant. It is not included in the temple treasures seized by the Babylonians. And when the Israelites are returned to Jerusalem 70 years later, they do not have the Ark of the Covenant with them to bring back to the temple, and they mourn the loss of the Ark. But it's clear that the Ark was already lost before the Babylonians took Jerusalem. And there are many, many powerful documented evidence for this. For example, Jeremiah is mourning the loss of the Ark already in 626 BC, and looking to a time when people will remember that it is gone. And they shall remember it, neither shall they visit it, neither shall that be done anymore. And this is where Ethiopia starts to get interesting. If you look at the map of the region, you can see that Israel and Ethiopia seem, well, they're in the same general corner of the world, but they're also really far apart. And how could it be that Ethiopia could be the answer to the loss of the Ark? And particular parts of Ethiopia, which involve the city of Aksum in the north and Lake Tana in the west, with Gondar and Bahadar. In the city of Aksum, as I mentioned, I visited the city of Aksum first in 1982. It was a war zone then. The Tigray People's Liberation Front were besieging the city. The Ethiopian government was still in command of the city, and I was flown in on a really rickety DC-3 aircraft, which was flown by basically two mercenaries, two Zambian pilots who were working for the Ethiopian government, and they were flying routes that most other pilots weren't willing to fly. And the DC-3 was being used to evacuate soldiers from war zones, so the back of it was actually just swimming in blood. When they came to Aksum, I'll never forget this, instead of doing the kind of long approach that they do, they just went into a dive. And straight down. I really thought that my end had come, but they did land successfully. And when I asked them to explain why they did this extraordinary entry to Aksum, they said, well, all the hills around the town are covered with machine gun nests, and the TPLF are out there, and we're going to get shot down if we do a long, slow approach. So this is the only way we live. And there in Aksum, I found extraordinary ceremonies taking place, and amazing. You know, it's like being transported back into the world of the Old Testament. Just suddenly you step out of the 20th century, now the 21st, of course, step out of the 20th century and find yourself transported to the Old Testament world. as though it's been frozen for thousands and thousands of years. And there's a sacred lake at Axum, just as there is at Hancock. And there are obelisks at Axum, stelae, they call them. Huge ones. One of them weighs more than 500 tons. They're a slightly different shape from the ancient Egyptian stelae. We see the stelae of Hatshepsut in the Temple of Karnak here, and these are the Ethiopian obelisks. And nobody really knows, who made these granite obelisks, but clearly a high level of technology was involved. And this is the kind of fellow you encounter in the hills around Axum, an armed force. And by the way, eventually those rebels, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, they overthrew the largest standing army in Africa, which was run by the dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam, and they took over the country. So they're to be taken seriously as a fighting force, and they're part of the reason why it's difficult to steal the Ark of the Covenant from Axum. Amazing processions and ceremonies, and in those processions a box is carried. And I began to ask questions about this box. What is this box? Well, this box is not, there's me again, so much younger. This box is not the Ark of the Covenant itself. It's a symbol or a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, which is carried out in these extraordinary ceremonies. They say they never bring the Ark out, and that is to protect the populace from it. But they carry this symbolic Ark, and there you can see it being carried on the head of the priest there. And here is another one of those ceremonies, and in back of that procession of people in the white cloaks, we see the oldest cathedral in Africa. That's the Cathedral of St. Mary of Zion. And we see down beside it here a chapel. And it's in that chapel that the Ark of the Covenant is supposed to lie. The Ark of the Covenant used to be kept in this cathedral, but it was moved during the reign of Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia. And by the way, Haile Selassie claimed to be the 225th direct line descendant of King Solomon of Jerusalem. And this chapel was built, but Haile Selassie himself was never allowed to see the Ark. When it's moved, it's wrapped in skins and cloths, we're told. And it was moved into this new chapel. So, coming a bit closer now to the chapel, and there I met my first guardian of the Ark. And it was fascinating to talk to him. And he tells me that he has the Ark of the Covenant in the temple, and no, I can't see it. And I ask him to tell me his story, and he explains that he's specially selected, he's voted in by the other monks. But that in fact, when he was voted in, he ran away. And they had to send people after him and capture him and bring him back. Because once you become the guardian of the Ark, you're exposed to its fearsome powers, and you can never leave that temple. You become that chapel. You become a prisoner of the chapel. And I said to him, what is so terrifying about the Ark of the Covenant? What is it? And he looked at me with one eye covered in a cataract, and he said, and this is when this story hooked me, he said, the Ark is a thing of fire. And he said that fiery character of the Ark was what had caused his cataracts, that it was making him blind, that it has made his predecessor blind. When we went back 2 or 3 years later, he was dead, and another guardian of the Ark had taken over, and he was getting cataracts. And he asked us if we came again to bring ointments that might help his eye. And again, the same story. So there's something, whatever they've got in there, there's some power about it. You can see the story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba being told in much Ethiopian art, because in the Ethiopian story, it is believed that there was indeed a relationship between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and that Solomon made the Queen of Sheba pregnant, and that she returned to her homeland, which the Ethiopians claim is Ethiopia. Nobody really knows where Sheba is, but they say it's our country. Sheba is the land of Ethiopia. She returned to Ethiopia. She bore King Solomon a son, and that son's name was Menelik, which means the son of the wise man in the Ethiopian language. And at about the age of 20, Menelik went to Jerusalem and was recognized by his father. taken into the court in Jerusalem. And spent a year there, but at the end of the year decided that it was his responsibility to steal the Ark of the Covenant and take it away to Ethiopia. And that's what he did. He somehow managed to steal the Ark of the Covenant and carry it out of Israel. Solomon heard about this. He sent an army after him. But what Solomon said, and it's rather interesting, according to the tradition, was that if my son has passed the borders of Israel, then this is a sign that God wants the ark to go to Ethiopia. He doesn't want it to stay in Israel anymore. And sure enough, Menelik had passed the borders of Israel, and he carried the ark off to Ethiopia, where supposedly, according to Ethiopian tradition, it has remained ever since. Well, I have to say the whole story seemed quite outrageous to me and impossible, but I was curious, and there were certain features about the ark that were really intriguing, and I did begin to dig deeper. I discovered that every church in Ethiopia has either a replica of the ark or a replica of the tablets of stone, which are kept in the Holy of Holies of the church and which are carried out in certain processions. They call the replicas of the tablets of stone tabots. And they're so sacred, they gain their sacredness by relationship to the original Ark of the Covenant in Axum. They're so sacred that they may not, that a church ceases to be a church the moment the tabot is taken out of it. That's how important they are. Church is deconsecrated. We have these extraordinary dances with prayer sticks and specific musical instruments, drums and trumpets, and sistra, which are exactly as described in the dances before the ark in the Old Testament. Exactly the same kind of pattern is being repeated in Ethiopia today, in that land frozen in time. And it's interesting to look at that musical instrument, the sistrum, and to realize that it has its ancient Egyptian background, because you can find sistra in the Cairo Museum, thousands of years old, exactly as those sistra that are being used in Ethiopia today. And here was another thing that really began to make me wonder if there could be reality to the Ethiopian story, because Ethiopia has a community of indigenous Jews. And they are a most unusual Jewish population. They do not practice modern rabbinical Judaism. They practice Old Testament Judaism. They do not have rabbis, they have priests. They continue to perform sacrifice of rams, which has been forbidden in Judaism for more than 2,000 years. And they are an ancient population in Ethiopia. They look just like Ethiopians, but they practice a very Old Testament form of Judaism. And Israel felt a responsibility for them. These people were called the Falashas. They called themselves the Beta Israel, the House of Israel. Israel felt a responsibility for them, and when Ethiopia was melting down during the overthrow of Mengistu Haile Mariam in 1991, the Israelis sent fleets of aircraft to Addis Ababa, and teams went out into the countryside, and they brought in all the Falashas from the countryside, and they flew them all out of Ethiopia. And they were in danger because they are a persecuted minority in Ethiopia, and the country was in a state of chaos at that time. And they were flown out, and now you will not find any Falashas in Ethiopia, which is sad. A few of them have gone back because they've not had that easy a time in Israel either. But where the majority of them are in Israel. But Santa and I were able to travel amongst Falasha communities in Ethiopia before Operation Solomon, and to meet them. And interestingly, they're very sweet, and they sell these tourist trinkets, which were Solomon and Sheba in bed, basically. and they have been gifted various Talmuds by the Israeli government, which knew about them, but they themselves followed only the Torah. And this was the kind of place of worship that they had in their simple rural life. No rabbis, priests, they still perform sacrifice. And Falasha elders told me something interesting. They said that their ancestors, I asked them, how come you guys are here? How do you explain your presence? And they said that their ancestors came to Ethiopia by following the Nile, that they'd formerly had a temple in Egypt, and that their first settlement in Ethiopia had been on an island in Lake Tana. And that's where the story started to get really interesting, because honestly, I can't buy into this Solomon and Sheba thing in great detail. It doesn't fit historically. It just doesn't work. But somehow there is this ancient Judaic tradition in Ethiopia, and there is a claim that the Ark of the Covenant is there. Now, there's those two places. They look very far apart. But once you put the River Nile between them, you find that they're not that far apart at all, and that the Nile is a road through the desert that can be followed. And digging deeper, I began to find what I think is the moment that the ark actually was taken out of the temple, and that was during the reign of King Manasseh, who was an idolater, who abandoned the traditional Judaic faith, and who installed pagan religious worship. And in particular, he installed in the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon a pagan idol, an Asherah, a tree goddess, a Canaanite goddess. Israeli scholars who I talked to felt that it would have been impossible for the Ark of the Covenant to have remained in the temple at that time, that the loyal priesthood would not have allowed it to be polluted by proximity to a pagan idol, and that they must therefore have taken the Ark of the Covenant out of Israel. After the fall of Manasseh, we hear of Josiah, his successor, cleansing the land of idols. And he's saying unto the Levites, and this is around between 640 and 609 BC, long before the Babylonian invasion, he's saying unto the Levites that taught all Israel, which were holy unto the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, did build. So right there he's asking them to put it back, and that has to mean it's already gone. And we know they didn't put it back because the Babylonians didn't find it. Where it went to, I believe, was Aswan in Upper Egypt. Because, as anybody who's been to Aswan will know, there is an island in the middle of the Nile opposite Aswan called Elephantina. And on the island of Elephantina, archaeology has discovered, we're looking at Elephantina here, the remains, fragmentary remains of a Jewish temple, and of a large Jewish community that lived on Elephantina is being excavated by the German Archaeological Institute. Very little has remained of it. It was built around 650 BC, exactly the time that Manasseh was polluting the temple. And it was destroyed round about 400 BC as a result of conflict between the Egyptians and the Jewish community on the island of Elephantine. We know that the temple the Jews had built there had exactly the same dimensions as the Temple of Solomon. And remember the purpose of the Temple of Solomon, to serve as an house of rest of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It's an extraordinary thing in the First Temple period for another temple to be built outside of Israel. The conflict with the Egyptians came because the sacred deity of Elephantina is Khnum, and Khnum is a ram-headed deity. And it seems that the Jews on the island of Elephantina were sacrificing rams. So this did not go down well with the Egyptians. And the Jewish community was driven out. There's no evidence that they were massacred, and there's no possibility that they traveled north through a hostile Egypt. I believe what they did was travel south. They followed the Nile River system through the deserts and up into the highlands of Ethiopia to Lake Tana, which is the source of the Blue Nile, and in fact of 6/10 of all the waters of the Nile. There's the amazing, majestic Blue Nile Falls in Ethiopia, and Lake Tana, where let's look at those again. I mean, they're just stunningly beautiful. That's Santa's work, of course. Marvelous place. I have to disillusion you a little bit. There's a sad story here. The Ethiopian government needs hydroelectric power. This photograph was taken in the early 90s. They've switched off the Blue Nile Falls now. They've diverted the Nile to create a hydroelectric station. Occasionally, when some high-profile tourist film is being made, they will switch the falls on again. But what a tragic waste and mistake, and how much better a way there would be to generate power for Ethiopia. Lake Tana itself, the source of the Blue Nile, they use reed boats on it, rather like the reed boats that were used in ancient Egypt. There are incredible monasteries on Lake Tana with ancient paintings and traditions, and it was in one of these that I heard the story that one of the islands in Lake Tana had once been the home to the Ark of the Covenant. And that island was called Tarnakirkos. So Santa and I made our way there, and we found on that island a remote monastic community who absolutely did claim that the Ark of the Covenant had been brought from Egypt to their island round about 400 BC, and that it had stayed there for 800 years. And they said we were Jews then, and that in the time of King Izana, around the late 300s AD, the Ark was taken by force from their island to Axum, and they point out these remains on the island which they say were part of the temple that had been built for the Ark there. So it's taken off to Axum and it's incorporated into the newly Christian religion of Ethiopia. This explains why a pre-Christian relic now becomes incorporated into Christianity. And we see these amazing ceremonies taking place in Axum, and all of them revolving around the Ark of the Covenant. And as I say, you cannot see the Ark in its original temple. And somebody asked me about, one of the lady who asked the last question before I began, asked me, you know, there are stories that the Ark is sometimes taken away or taken out of there. What they say in Axum is that there are tunnels underneath that whole complex where the Church of St. Mary of Zion and the chapel is. And that in times of danger, the Ark is taken down into those tunnels. And those tunnels run for miles through the mountains. And it can be taken out into other places. And there have been a number of times in history when the Ark has been removed from Axum. Once when Axum came under attack from a Muslim fundamentalist force, and another time when Germans apparently tried to take the Ark when Mussolini was running Ethiopia. The Ark was taken out then. And there's an amazing story in the 1890s that the Ark was used in a battle against the Italians. Mussolini's occupation of Italy in the 1930s was revenge for Adwa, the Battle of Adwa, when an Ethiopian army carrying the Ark of the Covenant utterly destroyed the Italian invading force. Amongst those stela in Axum, there's this rather interesting fallen one, which has a strange object carved onto the front of it. And that strange object is astonishingly like this Ark from Tutankhamun's tomb in ancient Egypt. So, you know, I don't think Spielberg was right that the Ark of the Covenant is in a warehouse in the United States. But I do think that the Ethiopians have it, and I think their story holds up. It's circumstantial evidence, you know. It's not. I can't give you an eyewitness account of the Ark, but I think the circumstantial evidence mounts up. Interestingly, Steven Spielberg also made a film about the Holy Grail. And I'm just going to finish this presentation with a little bit about the Grail, because for me the Grail and the Ark are one and the same thing. The earliest account of the Grail is in Chrétien de Troyes, and he describes the Grail as a cup, and that's most often how we think of it, as a golden cup. But in Wolfram von Essenbach's Parzival, the Grail is a stone. So if you think of a golden container, which is what a golden cup is, and you think of a stone, you have something very similar symbolically to the Ark of the Covenant, which contains the stone, golden, and contains the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. And Parzival, like Hiram, is the son of a widow. And my research suggests that there was a medieval quest for that the medieval quest for the Holy Grail was a quest for the Ark of the Covenant, and that it's intimately connected to what happened in Jerusalem. The Grail tradition begins in 1182, and by then the Templars had had their headquarters on the Temple Mount for 80 years, and it was recaptured by Saladin in 1187. Then Wolfram writes his Grail quest between 1195 and 1200. So there is the temple and the Temple Mount as it was seen in the time of ancient Israel. And there it is today, looking down on the Dome of the Rock and then the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the two neighboring structures that we see on the Temple Mount today. So the Temple Mount is in the hands of Islam. It's a curious contradiction because it's in the heart of the city of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, of course, is run by and controlled by Israel. But the Temple Mount is controlled by Islam by agreement with Israel. And it is a desperately sacred place in the Islamic world, really right up there after Mecca and Medina, you have the shrines on the Temple Mount, the Islamic shrines. And this one, the Dome of the Rock itself, stands exactly on the site of Solomon's temple. And in the heart of the Dome of the Rock is that huge rock. That's why it's called the Dome of the Rock. And it's believed that that rock was the floor of the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon, on which the ark stood. And beneath it is the eerie Well of Souls, a most extraordinary place below ground. Now, interestingly, the Knights Templar were renowned for their architectural work. They were key in the development of Gothic architecture in Europe, which in itself is an astonishing scientific revolution. But they made their headquarters right there in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. And they put a facade, a Gothic facade, on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's known that they also conducted extensive excavations underneath the Temple Mount. And some of their tunnels still survive. What were they looking for? I think they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. It makes sense. The Templars, everything, all their symbolism connects to the Ark of the Covenant and the Temple of Solomon. And there's the north porch of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there's the north porch of Chartres Cathedral in France. And they're really rather similar. And in the north porch of Chartres Cathedral, there's a statue of the Queen of Sheba and of Melchizedek holding the Grail. And there's the statue of the Queen of Sheba, and she is situated clearly in that statue in an African context, standing on the head of an African figure. And in that same porch is a story of the Ark of the Covenant. And that says, what the Latin wording says is, here is hidden the Ark of the Covenant. And it is being taken on a cart in exactly the direction of the Queen of Sheba's statue. So I must say, this as I got into this, it sort of sent chills down my spine. Is a story being told here? Are we being told that the Ark is in Ethiopia, in the land of the Queen of Sheba? And that's where King Lalibela is of great interest. He was an Ethiopian king who was exiled in Jerusalem in that key period, 1160 to 1185. And when he returned to Ethiopia, he had a mysterious force of supporters, of men of military power, who overthrew his rival and put him into command in Ethiopia. And the churches for which he's famous, the famous rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, are said in Ethiopian legends to have been built by angels. And I wonder whether, in a single night, I wonder whether these angels might have been a code for the Knights Templar with their advanced skills as masons. And here is the whole, a plan of the whole Lalibela complex. And it really is the most incredible places. These churches are hewn out of solid rock. That's the Church of St. George's. Cut from rock, just as the Sphinx is, into the shape of a cross in this case. And other churches that are cut into the mountainside. And this is the church of the Church of St. Mary's. The church to the right of the frame is the Church of St. Mary, who was a key figure to the Knights Templar. And it's very interesting that the Church of St. Mary is filled with Templar symbolism. The swastika was a symbol that was dear to the Knights Templar, and it's found on Templar churches, for example, Garway Templar Church in Hertfordshire in England. And we find Templar crosses on the ceiling of the Church of St. Mary, and we find indeed one Templar cross contained within a Star of David on the ceiling of the Church of St. Mary. It feels to me like the Templars were indeed there, pursuing their quest for the Ark of the Covenant. And most interesting, an ancient painting on the walls of St. Mary's Church shows the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but it shows the Al-Aqsa Mosque with crosses on its domes. And there was only one time that that was so, and that's when the Knights Templar had their headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then finally there's this column which is covered with cloth, and there's an inscription behind it which is very, 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 very secret. But there are few secrets in Ethiopia except the Ark of the Covenant itself, which cannot be extracted for a little bit of money. And I found a monk who was prepared to part with the secret for a little bit of money. And he told me, he didn't understand what the words said, but he said the words are written in your script, and they say, Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera. And that is an ancient device which was favored by the Templars. The Templars used this magic square where the words, you can read it in all different directions, as you can see, Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. It's a classic Templar device, and there it is in a church in Ethiopia. There's much Templar symbolism in Aksum as well, as we would expect. And finally, the story of James Bruce of Kinnaird, which I told in The Sign and the Seal. James Bruce, my middle name is Bruce, by the way. I was born in Edinburgh. James Bruce was an amazing Scottish adventurer in the 1700s. He was very tall. I believe he was about 6 feet 9 inches tall, which in those days was really tall. And Samuel Johnson, that acerbic wit in London society, described him as the tallest man I ever saw free of charge. And Bruce went off to Ethiopia with tremendous courage. With his, we don't know. There's a mystery around his journey to Ethiopia. Everybody, I think, has heard of the Book of Enoch, right? Well, here's what you may not know, is the Book of Enoch was lost to Western culture for well over 1,000 years. It was known up to the 700s or so, and then it was lost completely. One thing James Bruce brought back from Ethiopia was a complete text of the Book of Enoch in Ge'ez, the sacred language of Ethiopia. And like many adventurers of his time, he was a multi-talent James Bruce, and he learned languages very fast, and he translated the Book of Enoch into English. And we have, as a result of James Bruce, the Book of Enoch again today. He was also looking for the source of the Nile, he said, and he did find the source of the Nile in Ethiopia. And he based himself at this fairy tale castle in Gondar on the shores of Lake Tana. And it's amazing to think that Ethiopia is full of castles like this. You would imagine you were in some medieval English town, but there it is in Ethiopia. And he came back to England, and he died in England, a little bit broken-hearted because he was constantly insulted by Samuel Johnson, and not believed. He wasn't believed for anything. He reported in his travels that he'd seen men cutting a steak off a living cow and eating it raw. Nobody would believe that in England. They still do that in Ethiopia to this day, and they put a mud pack on the back of the cow's butt, you know, and it heals up. And he said that they had an instrument like a lyre, a biblical lyre in Ethiopia. And Samuel Johnson said, since James Bruce left, there's one less lyre in Ethiopia. He died somewhat in obscurity, and I learned that he was buried in Larbert Churchyard, quite near Edinburgh. So I went there with Santa to look for his grave, and by that time I'd become convinced that Bruce's real purpose in Ethiopia was to seek out the Ark of the Covenant. And I document the journey that he made to Aksum at a very key date. I won't go into all of it here. But I wanted to track James Bruce down. And I found his grave in a state of complete disrepair, overgrown with nettles. But then I found in the car park, lying on its side then, but since erected, the obelisk that had originally stood over the grave. And the inscription on the obelisk is written there. And I asked the keeper of the church, who is restoring this obelisk? And he said, well, that would be Lord Elgin, who's the head of the Bruce family in Scotland. And I picked up the phone and I called Lord Elgin's estate, and amazingly he answered the phone himself. And I said, look, I'm a journalist, I'm researching the story of James Bruce, and I understand you know something about him. And he said, well, actually, I know everything there is to know about Bruce. And I said, well, I'm particularly interested in his travels to Ethiopia. Can I come and talk to you? And he said, I'll give you half an hour. So we went over there, and 5 or 6 hours later we left. And we had an amazing conversation with Lord Elgin, who's quite an extraordinary character, Freemason himself. And the key question I wanted to ask him was, because I couldn't find the evidence, was James Bruce a Freemason? And he said, my dear boy, of course he was a Freemason. And he gave me the Kilwinning Lodge number 2 to which James Bruce belonged. So that's a little sideline to the story. Let's just close by going back to Jerusalem now. I don't think anybody would doubt that Jerusalem is the heart of a global crisis today. It's a place where the three great monotheistic faiths all collide: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Here are ceremonies being conducted in front of the Wailing Wall. There is an aspiration to build the third temple in Jerusalem. But until the third temple is built, Jews may only worship as close as the last surviving wall of the previous temple. And so ceremonies and great religious fervor is shown at the Wailing Wall. But there are factions in Israel, notably the Temple Mount faithful, who want to build the third temple. And the place they want to build it is precisely where the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stand. So one can consider, with the fury and emotions that surround religious issues in the Middle East today, what would be involved if their wish were to be fulfilled, if they were to take back the Temple Mount and attempt to expel the Muslim community from the Temple Mount. It would be catastrophic. There have been many riots already caused by the Temple Mount faithful marching on the Temple Mount. The one thing the Temple Mount faithful need in order to justify the building of the third temple is the Ark of the Covenant. They need it back, and they have an aspiration to acquire it wherever in the world it may be. Oddly enough, in Iran, there is another tradition about the Ark of the Covenant, and it's written deeply into Shia traditions and legends, and it concerns a figure called the Mahdi, or the hidden Imam, who vanished from history some 1,000 years ago, and has said, rather like King Arthur, to be waiting the moment when he will return to the world. And there are many now amongst the Shias who believe that the Mahdi is already back, he's already present, and that what he needs to do is to acquire the Ark of the Covenant. The Mahdi will bring forth the Ark of the Covenant, the Shia prophecies say. And actually, it's impossible to understand the motivation of a man like Ahmadinejad without being aware of the story of the hidden Imam, because Ahmadinejad is definitely seeking to build nuclear weapons. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. And the reason he's doing so is the Shia prophecies require him to prepare a powerful army to support the Mahdi and to sweep away the unbelievers from the Holy Land, and to bring about the last battle, which will be an apocalyptic final battle that will usher in the end of days, the end of the world, the day of judgment. It's a very, very scary scenario, and it involves the Ark of the Covenant. Just as Judaic fundamentalism, in the form of the Temple Mount faithful, also they need the Ark of the Covenant. Fundamentalist Christians need it too. The book of Revelation makes clear that the return of the Ark to the temple is one of the signs of the last of days. So from the perspective of fundamentalist Christianity, the reappearance of the Ark of the Covenant is absolutely necessary to bring about the day of judgment and the end of the world and the rapture. So one thing I can say is that if the Ark of the Covenant is indeed in Ethiopia, I hope it stays there. And that maybe that old story is right, that God wanted the ark to go to Ethiopia, because that hidden away in those amazing mountains and valleys, protected by a devout and armed community who do not want anybody to take the ark from them, hidden away there, it is safe from the horrors of fundamentalism, and nobody can use it to bring about World War III or the end of the world. The last thing we want is the return of the Ark of the Covenant to the Holy Land. Personally, I'm really glad it's in Ethiopia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Unbelievable. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham. What an absolutely fascinating and mesmerizing speaker. And so another round of applause for the remarkable Graham.